Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to take a look at a very useful topic for, I would say, chess players of really of all strengths, though of course what I'm going to say today probably won't be of much use to a grandmaster, but still it's one of those classic chess topics that never goes away, that we all have to deal with in many different ways throughout our career, and at different levels and in different levels of complexity, the whole 9 yards. So what I'm referring to is the topic of bishops against knights. Now, those of you who are beginners, and those of us who can remember back to our beginner days, probably read in a book somewhere that bishops and knights were both worth about 3 pawns. So that would make them, of course, equivalent. But we quickly learned that when one piece or the other is stronger, of course, depends on many different circumstances. And over the next, at least I think 2 shows and maybe more, we'll take a look at some different situations where either one piece or the other is more useful, and sometimes I think positions where it really isn't clear which minor piece is going to prove to be the more useful one. So what we're going to look at today are some more basic examples. I have 3 in particular from old past games of mine, and I hope that this will prove instructive and useful, I think, more for beginning players. But as you'll see, I mean, I think even a more advanced player can learn something. The last game shows even a pretty good player, hopefully, making a pretty serious mistake, albeit in time trouble, but still. So let's have a look at these 3 examples. This first one was played more than 20 years ago. I had white, and it was played in a local tournament back in Las Vegas. So let's maybe start from here. All right, so I have white, materials equal, and okay, I should be able to win pretty routinely, and for a variety of reasons. So I mean, I've got a very good bishop against a pretty mediocre knight, and my opponent's d pawn is weak, but still, given the limited material, he should have some drawing chances. Okay, so the game continued with me exchanging. You might want to ask yourself quickly, why white can't play rook takes a7? So what's wrong with this? Don't I just pick up some material here? Don't I get a free pawn? Well, of course the answer is no, and not only because black can play rook takes f2 in response. I mean, that would at least prevent black from losing a pawn, though I would be happy with that because I would have the 2 connected queenside passers. But of course, because black plays rook takes d2, and then I would lose. Okay, so rook takes e7 is what I played, and now I played bishop to c3. So this bishop is on, obviously, a great diagonal here, one such that potentially I could have a back rank mate threat. I mean, if it's my move, I play rook to e1. Black would be forced to exchange rooks, because if he moves it away, rook to e8 would be checkmate. All right, well here my opponent played f5, and now I played rook to e1. And here, perhaps, black should try to keep the rooks on the board. I'm still significantly better, but after the rook exchange, now I think my chances go up. So a position like this, all the static advantages are really in my favor. My bishop is clearly better than his knight, for an obvious reason. It's an open board. Its diagonals are unimpeded, and also because his knight really has no special targets as well. Furthermore, his pawns are split, so this pawn on d5 is isolated, the pawn on a7 is isolated, and also, by virtue of having all his pawns on light squares, it means that his pawns are safe for my bishop. That's true, but it also means that my king, for instance, well, not just for instance, but really only my king, but it's big. My king can penetrate all over the place, and he's really not able to keep it out using the pawns. So, I mean, there's always problems like, my king going all the way on this diagonal and looking for some targets and some places to break through. So black is, I'm pretty sure, let's say 98% sure or more, that black is losing here. Still, perhaps black could generate some kind of counterplay, well, not counterplay, but could generate some kind of defense. But after his next move, the game should be over. Okay, so I would say for a more advanced player, this should be a very simple position for you to solve. But I would say for a player who's less experienced, it could take a little bit more time. And in fact, my opponent was a pretty good player. I mean, he was 1900, and he was a bit careless here in playing King F7. So take a moment and see if you can figure out what it is that White's move ought to play. And even if you didn't know before, I'm sure that my at least telling you that there's something good here ought to give you a clue that something very interesting and clear should be present in the position. So see if you can figure out what that is. Okay, well, there's no pawn that I can win, and so the only thing that really could be present is something that forces an exchange, or at least strives to make an exchange, and that's the move bishop to d4. Now, the problem for black here is quite simply that if it's my move and I make the exchange, I'm winning. So let's take a quick look here. Give white a second move in a row. So takes. And the next thing that I would do is just perch my king on d4. So we'll get that going here. Okay. Well, actually, I can't do it by force, but it doesn't really matter. So let's say king to d3, king e5, and now I play a4. So I'm simply going to create an outside pass pawn with b4 and then a5, and as his king retreats to deal with it, I bring my king up. And ultimately what I'm going to do is not even rush to create the pass pawn on the queen side, but then push my kingside pawns as far as I safely can, so that way when it becomes a race, when I come rushing over to take his kingside pawns and his king tries to come around and capture mine, I'm going to be ahead in the race. And let's just suffice to say that it really shouldn't be very close. White should win quite easily here. And I'll leave you to work out the details for yourself. Okay, so after bishop to d4, if black doesn't want to lose a pawn, he needs to play knight to c8. Actually, okay, two other moves we should discuss. All right, knight a4 is very bad because the knight is dominated by the bishop. So you can see the knight, any square it would try to move to, it would be captured by the bishop. And of course, by playing b3 here, I force that. So he's got to come back to b8, b6, and then I take, and the king comes up, and so on. All right. The other move, though, that needs to be considered is knight to c4, because now if I play bishop takes a7, he can recapture on b2. And while I have the outside passed pawn, it's going to be a little bit tough for me to get it going too far. I mean, I can play bishop to d4, and of course you can't play knight a4 because then he's just losing the knight. I bring my king over, and the knight falls. But you can play knight c4. I play a4, and of course I'm still better, but maybe there's some work still to be done. So I'm not sure that I should play bishop takes a7. Of course, if I play b3, he takes the a pawn, and maybe I can play a4, but on a4, then he can play probably a6 is best. But all right, I'm I think happy here. I can play what should I do? I mean, I can play b4. I can maybe play b3 in some situations. Probably b3 is fine. So, okay, I mean, I would say that I'm not winning just yet. So I was a little premature. I mean, maybe in the long run it's a clear win, but I mean, there's still work to be done. Let's put it that way. It's not trivial just yet. So bishop to d4. He does have the one defense with knight to c4. He played knight to c8 though, and now it's really quite simple. So see if you can figure out what white should play here. Okay, well, the obvious answer is bishop to c5. But I thought I could even get a little bit more in the position by first playing f4. Well, the point being that his knight can't move because he loses the a pawn. And if he moves the a pawn, which he does, now I play bishop to c5. So bishop to c5 is basically the right answer. I was just making a little finesse in the hopes of trying to improve my position to the maximum first. So he could have kept his knight alive, and then I would just win the second pawn, and it's easy. So from here, it's very simple. Black is basically playing without a knight, unless he is willing to let me exchange it off, and then it's just very simple. So king e6, king e2, king d7, king d3, king c6, b4, a5, king d4, and black is going to be put in Zugzwang very quickly. If he moves the knight, of course, I take. If he moves the king, I'm going to take on d5, and then I'll have an extra pawn for nothing, and my king will run over to the king side. And he can push a pawn, but I can run him out of pawn moves without too much trouble. And I'm also threatening simply to play b takes a5 as well, so that's yet one more problem. So black played a4, I played h3, h6, h4, h5, g3. So perfect. I have one tempo move to spare, and I mean, even if I don't have that, I mean, something like king to e5 would be winning. So it's not that I needed it, but it's just a nice way to finish. Whatever black does either loses the pawn or allows me to exchange. And so just to be very quick, so g3, knight d6, takes, b5, king e6, and now I don't even have to sacrifice my b pawn. I just play king to c5, and I win the d pawn for nothing, after which it's quite simple. In fact, I'll go on and win this guy too if I want, and obviously it's a very easy win. Okay, so the key idea here, or one of the key themes here, is this domination idea, which we saw a couple of times. The main position being here, after knight to c8, to play bishop c5, or as in the game f4, and then bishop to c5. But we also saw it in this position, where if bishop to d4, knight a4. All right, so be aware of this idea. It's a standard one, but a crucial one. You know, there's a lot of times where you can use that, and it goes beautifully in conjunction with this idea of the outside passed pawn. All right, so we've seen one example. Let's take a look at a slightly more interesting case. And here I'm black. This is from even longer ago. This is from 1981, when I was 1870, and my opponent was 1582. All right, so let's take a look from, I don't know, let's say here. Okay, so I'm black in this position, so let's flip the board. And I'm up the pawn on d5. So I took, and I traded again. He threw this in. And, okay, so here we've got an interesting position. Of course, white's pawn structure is terrible, but my d5 pawn is kind of weak as well. This guy is kind of weak, and also, at least when white takes it, then the pawn on b7 will be hanging as well. So I'd like to keep all of my goodies if I can, but the most important thing, especially if it's going to become a knight versus bishop, well, it's already a knight versus bishop situation. We just happen to have rooks on the board too. The key thing is for me to create a position where what's most important are the static features. All right, so if we've got a position where both sides have passers on opposite sides of the board, and you know we both have our own majorities that we're trying to promote, then all things being equal, it's better for him to have the bishop. It's better to have the bishop than the knight. So I want to keep the position nice and simple. And so it's worth trying to figure out how exactly I can do that. So again, take a couple of minutes, stop the recording here, and try to work out what black to move should do. Should I play rook to d8? Should I play maybe knight to e2? Knight to e6, kind of similar. What's the best way for black to proceed here? Okay, well, I think I worked out a pretty good way to handle this position way back long ago, 27 years ago. I started with knight to c2, so I'm going to trade the rooks off, and we'll see what exactly I had in mind. So all these come off, and now bishop takes d5. And so again here it's worth trying to figure out what I should play. The choices are bringing the knight to d3, or first saving the pawn with b6, or I guess b5, but b5 would make a lot less sense because the pawn would be vulnerable there. So really, knight to d3 or b6. What should I play? Okay, well I hope you saw the problem here. b6 would be the most desirable move strategically, because okay, I'm keeping my pawn over there, and then the knight to d3 just threatens lots and lots of pawns. The problem is, after bishop to e4, oops, my knight's dominated, and I can save it, fortunately, by playing f5, and chucking a pawn here, but this is certainly, this should be okay for white. So I mean, knight f3, I don't think I should be losing here, but certainly this is no longer all that appealing either. So the right move here is knight to d3. Now, the fact that white can grab the pawn on b7 really isn't that much of a cause for concern, not only because I can play knight takes b2, in which case white doesn't have any majority, but also because of another standard trick that it's very important to know. So I played knight takes f2 check, king to g2, and now I played knight to d3. And, okay, I'm threatening the pawn on f4, but I don't really care about that pawn too much. I mean, okay, I'm happy to take any pawn I can, but really the big point is that after b3, I have knight to c1. So that's a pattern that you definitely want to really memorize, that you just want to have as something that's kind of part of your automatic chess knowledge, really, that you just you're familiar with that, and you can find it in a 1-minute game as easily as a tournament game. And so this is really important. I mean, then I don't let him have his majority. He still has these kind of goofy pawns on the king side that are split up and weak. And alright, so I'm not 100% sure that I'm winning here, but certainly I can torture white for a good long time with no real danger of losing. Alright, so he thought that it's best for him to just give up that b pawn right away and keep the f pawn and activate his king. So he plays king to f3, which I think is a good move. And I responded in kind with the move king to f8. So I'd like to activate my king, and furthermore, I prevent him from, let's say, fully utilizing the tempo, because here he can't play king to e4 because knight c5 check wins the bishop. So I've got this fork here. So he can't bring his king to the 4th rank just yet, and so I'm at least gaining, you can maybe think of it as half a tempo with respect to bringing my king out. So he played bishop to a6, I played knight takes b2, and now he plays bishop to b5. And so here I'm one tempo away from being lost. I mean, if he could play king to e2, well, maybe I'm not lost, but I probably am lost. But maybe my counterplay on the king side would be fast enough, like f6 and g5 or something along those lines, trying to make a passer. But really, with my knight being trapped, this would be big trouble. But the thing to keep in mind is that this isn't the same as the domination position we saw in the previous game. So here I can just get out. So I have knight to d1, and he's not able to keep me locked up. So bishop c4, knight c3, and now I'm clearly safe. I can come out to a4, and then b6 or c5, and if he prevents that with like bishop to b3, then knight to b5, and my knight gets out. So I'm safe, and I'm able to just keep playing for a win here. Alright, so he played a3. Probably not the best move in the world. Okay, I played king e7, continuing to activate my king. And now he plays king to g4, which is a little strange. I think he would have been better off centralizing his king. So he's right to be worried about the king side, but this move really allows me to put all my pieces on very good squares. Okay, so I played knight to e4, and he's not going to go forward anymore, because if king to f5, then knight to d6 wins the bishop. While if king to h5, it's even more amusing. I have knight to f6 checkmate. Alright, so he played a4, which is another, I think, poor move. So I played a5. So now I fixed the pawn on a light square. More importantly, well, what's important about it being on a light square is not that I can win it, because obviously his bishop can defend it, but my own pawn is now going to be safe forever. Of course it was safe anyway, but I like the position even more. And his pawn, by bringing it closer to me, can become vulnerable. Alright, so here he played bishop to f1. And this is just an outright blunder. So, okay, I mean, he was tired of all the little tactical tricks, that he can't go to f5, he can't go to h5, he can't even bring his king back to f3 because of knight to d2 check, and I pick off the bishop. But, you should just look for some kind of useful pass move, or maybe play bishop to b5, something along those lines. And, maybe f5 and then king f4. And, force me to prove that I can win the position. I think I can, but, hey, there's nothing for him to lose by making me do the job. So instead he played bishop to f1, and now we see the pawn on a4 is just a terrible weakness. I play knight to c3, and the game is really over here because he can't defend it. If he plays bishop to b5, I just take, a4, and he can't stop my pawn while I can stop his. So after knight to c3, he played king f3. I took, knight c5, and here once again we've got an outside passed pawn situation. And as usual, what you should use the outside passed pawn for is not so much that you want. It's not so much as a pawn that you want to promote. Of course, if you can, terrific. But it's the primary value of an outside passed pawn in most cases is its use as a diversion. So here it's going to tie down white's bishop or the king, sometimes both. And in the meantime, then I can exploit all of his weaknesses on the king side. So he plays f5, hoping correctly to exchange pawns. So it's not a bad general idea. Of course, when you're down material, you want to trade pawns, not pieces, all things being equal. Okay, so I don't bother though. I just view it as another pawn that I can try to win instead of just exchange. So knight to b7, knight to d6, and now a4. Okay, so now he's tied down to the f5 pawn as well. It's a strange thing, but it's just true that when in these bishop versus knight situations, putting pawns on the same color as the bishop always seems to make them weaker, not stronger. And really the reason for that, I think, is that the pawns can be attacked with impunity. See, if the pawn's on a dark square, my king is only going to be able to attack it head on from a light square, and the bishop can prevent me from even being within proximity of that pawn. Whereas if the pawn is on a light square, my king is in front of it on a dark square, and none of his pieces can do anything about that. So here all I can do is just sit and wait for the axe to fall. He plays h5, I play a3, plays bishop to b1, and we can see that his bishop is now overloaded. It's got to protect against a2, and it has to protect the pawn. So it can't do both, and so I just take the pawn. Now I'm 3 pawns up, and appropriately enough, my opponent resigned here. Okay, so here we saw a situation where the knight was as good as the bishop, and based on my opponent's play, it became better and better and better, especially as my opponent put the pawns on light squares. Okay, so let's see if we can learn some lessons from this game as we take a look at the next one. Alright, and this is from a game 25 that I played against Joel Benjamin way back in 1998. Okay, so I had white, and this position should be equal. So I've got 2 slightly weak pawns, he's got 1 slightly weak pawn. We're both pretty short of time. I think we both had about 5 minutes or slightly under 5 minutes around here. I don't know exactly, but I remember it was getting fairly low. Maybe a little less than that even, but I think that's about what it was, somewhere 4 or 5 minutes. Alright, now here I want to activate my king. So it's the only piece that's not really doing a job at this point. I'd like to play king f2, but there's an obvious problem with king f2. To wit, knight to d1 check, and then knight takes c3. Oops. So we can't do that. That would just be an outright error. And so I have to figure out some way to try to activate my king. It's the only piece that's not really functioning. So what should I do here? So take a minute and see if we can figure out what is the white's move ought to do. Well, I felt that this knight was really bothering me, and so I played the move knight to f5. Now, we'll get to this in a moment, but it can point out just that a more patient move like knight to e2, instead of the direct approach that I chose in the game, would have been quite fine. So I'm protecting the c3 pawn in advance, and next I'll play king to f2, and this is simply an equal position. Alright, but again, in a little bit of time trouble, and annoyed by this knight, I played the move knight to f5. And, okay, so you should ask yourself, well, what happens on the exchange here? So again, take a minute, look at the exchange, and see if you can figure out what the appropriate assessment of the position is. Now, the first thing you should notice is that I made a kind of an ambiguous expression. I said, the exchange. The problem, of course, is that black has 2 ways to make the exchange. And subconsciously, I just kind of automatically assumed in my haste that the only exchange that needed to be considered was knight takes f5. And after e takes f5, okay, let's say black plays king f8, king f2, king e7, king e3, king f6, king f4. This position is completely unlosable for white. So absolutely no problems whatsoever. I mean, black shouldn't lose it either, but white will never lose this position, period. But this was not the most clever bit of analysis on my part during the game, because he doesn't only have the knight that he can capture with, but the bishop. And now I'm just in trouble. So as simple as that, because after e takes f5, look at my pawn structure. So I've got all these pawns on light squares, which means that his king is going to have a field day on the dark squares. Now, I could have put up more resistance than I did in the game, as we'll see, but it's already a very difficult position. It's a tough task from a practical standpoint. So this was a serious error, knight to f5. It gives black all the winning chances and leaves me with difficult drawing chances, certainly in a fast game. In a fast game, I would say it's pretty much hopeless, pretty near hopeless anyway, and knight f5 is just a bad move regardless. So let's see how things continue. So he played king to f8, and of course he wants to just wind his way in on the dark squares. King e7, king f6, maybe king to g5 or king e5, depending on what I do. And again, just exploiting all these pawns of mine on light squares. And of course he can put one more pawn on a light square by playing knight to d1 or knight to d5 at some point, driving the pawn to c4. So I'm definitely in big trouble here. Now, one interesting move I could have tried at this point was f6. Putting the pawn on a dark square, unless he takes it, of course, and if he does take it, well, then I've at least messed up his structure some. So f6 might have been a reasonable practical chance. Okay, so I played g4 instead, protecting my pawn, but again, just making this whole fragile chain. Okay, played king to e7, and okay, here I still, of course, can't play king to f2, so my not-so-clever idea is still not working. Now, the best move here might have been bishop to a2. And here, black should be a little bit alert. So, if he plays king to f6, for instance, most natural move, now I play bishop to b3. And lo and behold, the dominated knight, once again. I'm threatening king to f2. And now all of a sudden I'm actually equal, so the position is probably a draw. At this point. So that would be an error. Better is h5. Now, of course, if I play bishop to b3, he just takes twice on g4. And notice I can't play. Well, okay, it's not even close, so never mind. All right, so the right move here is just to play g takes h5. Pretty much forced to do this. And now if he plays knight f5, king f2, it's funny, but his knight really has no good squares now, so it can't go to g3 to attack my pawn because of my king, of course. Can't go to e3 because of my king. d4 is covered. And also this bishop on a2 is really well placed, hitting the pawn on f7. So here too, I think white is pretty close to equal. So black should play knight to d1. Very good move. Either winning the c-pawn or forcing my pawn to an awful square where it impedes my bishop, and just all around bad. So probably best is bishop to b3, takes, king f2, and black does win a pawn here. And okay, I'm not sure that black is winning yet, but it's obviously the burden is all on me here to prove a draw. So there aren't that many pawns left. That increases my drawing chances. In some positions I might be able to play h4, 5, 6, but again, when you push the pawn to h5, you might be just creating another problem. So, alright, black is clearly better. Whether it's enough to win or not, I don't know. Alright, so going back to the position after king to e7, bishop a2 would have been best, what we just saw. But I played king to h2, and his king takes up this dominating post, and now knight to d1. Alright, so here, if I play bishop to a2, he just plays f6, and I'm still just going to lose my c-pawn, or else have to put it on the dreadful c4 square. So I put it on c4 right away. He plays f6 anyway. And, what do I do here? So my position's just terrible. He's simply going to play king to d4, knight to b2, take the c-pawn, and then use the d-pawn, again as the outside passed pawn, as a diversionary weapon. And I'm going to lose this. So I tried h4. I mean, I'm very short on time, and it doesn't matter. I'm even shorter, we could say, on position. Of course, unfortunately, again, I can't play king to e2 because the knight's e3, and I lose the bishop. So it's kind of like the last game, except this time I'm suffering with the miserable bishop. So h4, I'm hoping I can swap off some pawns on the king's side and scare up a draw. No real chance of that happening, but it's the only play that I've got. It's the only thing I can do here. Okay, so knight to b2 is advertised. If I play bishop to a2, plays king d4, g5. He should swap one pair of pawns here, because if he takes right away, I mean, it's really not going to matter. But okay, I can maybe play king to g4 and king h5. So I at least get in here, and only bad things can happen by allowing chances like that. So you should never allow a chance like that if you don't need to. So h takes g5 would be the right way to play, hg, and now knight c4. And here, white has no chance of winning the f-pawn. So let's say g takes f6, g takes f6, king g4, and now, if nothing else, can maybe play d5, and then on king to king h5, we just play king e5, king g6, and basically whatever wins, knight e3, bishop e1, d4, and so on. And okay, white's king is just doing nothing on g6 except abandoning the bishop to the impossible task of stopping the d-pawn. So this is a dead lost position for white. Okay, of course, it doesn't really matter. I mean, so bishop to a2 is what we just looked at. He wins the pawn with king d4 anyway. I played bishop to c2, figuring that the bishop is better placed on f5, where it maybe keeps tabs on the pawn on f5, so I can play this g5 business. All right, now for some reason, Benjamin played king to d4 anyway. Doesn't really matter. I played g5, takes, knight c4, and here, excuse me, I don't remember if I lost on time or if I just, or what. I mean, it was around the verge of losing on time, and mainly I was just extremely frustrated by the position, and I might have just let my flag fall for all I know in the last few seconds because there's just nothing to be done here. I can't play. Let me put in this variation. Okay, I mean I can't play gf, king g4 because of knight e3. So once again, another miserable knight fork. And what else is there to do? I can't play bishop to b3 because of knight to d2. And I mean, even if I'm allowed to go around the corner, so let's just play king g4 just for fun, and ignore knight to e3 check. Well, once again, just king e5, king h5, knight e3, and black wins with his eyes closed. All right, so here we saw a couple of situations where the knight dominated the bishop. First game we saw the bishop dominate the knight, and we also saw some cases where it's a little bit in between, where the bishop can get the upper hand over the knight. Certainly there are various tactical possibilities where knights can get trapped by bishops, not only when the knight's on the back rank, but some more intricate versions like what we saw in this position here with the threat of king f2. So this is, let's say, a little intro to the problem of bishops and knights, and next time we'll look at some, as I said, more complicated versions. So hope you learned something and enjoyed it too, and got to see another loss here. So it's always good to see the presenter doesn't always win the games, and well, that was the case here. So thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, as I said, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.